Hi everyone. Just wanted to uh, go over a summary of a few things from last week. Um, I apologize, I'm not feeling great today, so you just get my voice and not my lovely face for this week. But hopefully I'll be back smiling at you again next week. So just wanted to go over a couple of concepts from the classroom, and then we'll go over the quiz, a couple things on there. So first thing was, sit down here, just wanted to go over quick um, this notion of the substitution effect and income effect, and that point where, um, so our question was, and I had talked about this in the discussion board, but just in case you didn't see it, which of the following occupations is it more likely the income effect of a wage change exceeds substitution effect? So I'm going to zip over here to, it's right here. This chart here I just found one online, but this is also found in your materials. And so on this chart, on this backward bending supply curve, you can see how above this line here is where when it starts to, so here's the supply line here. This axis on this side is wage. So wage, down here is nothing, and this is wage increasing on this axis. On this side is labor. So this is number of hours worked going out this way. So where this supply chain or this supply line, supply curve starts bending backwards, that point where it changes direction is where income effect is greater than substitution effect. And what that's saying is that generally, and we'll go back to our question here because it's the answering our question. Income effect exceeds substitution effect, so it's the fact that you're getting more money is not necessarily making you want to work more hours. And that's so hours are increasing, and then all of a sudden, well, even though I'm getting more money, I don't necessarily want to work those additional hours. There's a point where you reach that point here at this axis or this cross point here. You reach a point in your income where you're like, I'm making enough. I don't want to work those extra hours anymore. That's this increased point here. So our question was, which of the occupations is it more likely that that is the case? Well, so you're going to be looking at the higher income occupations, physician, dentist, potentially nurses, especially, sadly, not nurses necessarily in the Pittsburgh area because they don't make nearly as much as nurses in a good majority of the rest of the country. Their pay rates in Pittsburgh are oh, look at that. Pay rates in Pittsburgh tend to be much less than in a lot of other areas in the country, but some nurses can make $80 an hour on if they're working extra shifts or something like that. So that may push them above this, but they may get to a point where they're like, nah, I'm not really interested in working all those extra shifts anymore, and it's so the extra money is not necessarily worth the loss of their time, their free time, their leisure time. So that's where this is the point where loss of leisure time becomes more important. They don't want to lose that. So hopefully that makes sense. I would say the answer, and there's no definite correct answer, but the physicians and dentists of the ones that were listed there would definitely be above this curve, and potentially nurses as well, depending on their pay grade, etc., would be above that as well. So let's go back here. These I had put some notes in for this discussion, so I won't go over that. I think that was everyone kind of talked about different aspects there. So I do want to go into the quiz. I'm just going to go in and pretend that I'm taking it so we can take a look at it. So two things that I wanted to talk about in the quiz. So the concept of monopsony power. So when you think about monopsony, so monopsony and monopoly are related concepts. So when you have a monopoly, you're talking about a monopoly is a business that is one seller that has many buyers. So a monopoly is, for example, here in New York, we have, if we want cable television, we need to get that from Spectrum, which was formerly Time Warner. But so you have to get that through Time Warner Cable, and that's the only way you're going to get cable television. They have a monopoly on that here. So if I want cable television, I need to get it from Time Warner Cable, and so that's one seller to lots of buyers out there. And so that's a monopoly. So they can set the price for that. It's going to cost, charge, they can charge me almost $300 a month, which is what they do for my cable and my internet and my telephone. And, and I'm going to pay it because that's my option here. That's the beauty of a monopolistic um, uh, setting, which is what cable television kind of is. Now you can get Dish and you can get some other options now, so it's kind of taking the monopoly away, but that's kind of how that works. A monopsony, which is what this is, what we're talking about in this question, is a similar concept, but it's where you have one um, buyer of something with many sellers. So in this case, we're talking about, and this is what is talked about in the chapter, we're talking about a hospital as the buyer of something, and the sellers is the workforce. So, but it could be suppliers, it could be other things, it could be people selling supplies or devices, etc. But so in this case, we're talking about the specialized workforce of a hospital, say in a rural area. You have one hospital. So an example of this is last night I was at a hospital. I was at a hospital, Auburn Community Hospital, which is a small community hospital in upstate New York. And it's the only hospital in the area. There is no other hospital nearby. The closest hospital is in Syracuse, which is probably half an hour or so away. So in Auburn, if you're a nurse and you want to work for a hospital, that's your option. So they control, Auburn Community Hospital has a monopsony on the workforce there. If you want to work as a nurse in a hospital, if you're an emergency department physician, if you want to work as a respiratory therapist, as a physical therapist, all those types of roles that if you want to work in the hospital setting, they really have that monopsony power. And what the book was talking about, it really governs wage, benefits, etc. They really have that power to govern that. And ultimately, it can also govern things like a shortage, because having that much power can create a shortage. If they say keep the wages low, might drive people out of the area and create a shortage. So monopsony is related to monopoly, but don't get the two confused. They are somewhat related, but a monopoly really affects things like pricing and availability of services, whereas monopsony impacts things more um, like how they interact with not necessarily customers, but more the supply chain side, workforce supply chain side of the operation. So any more questions on that, please let me know. The other one I wanted to talk about was the last question, describing contingency fees or contingent fees. So this was in the textbook in the section where they were talking about medical malpractice and different types of legal situations. But what a contingency fee is it's a situation where an attorney will work on contingency. And what I always think of when I think about attorneys that work on contingency are the multitude of um, attorneys, and I know there's some national ones and there's different local ones, but you see them on television all the time. They're personal injury attorneys. There are attorneys that are working on behalf of claims for, have you had mesh implanted from a hernia operation? Have you ever taken this drug or that drug? And were you injured due to these things? Have you had a family member that died secondary to some kind of asbestos inhalation, et cetera, et cetera? So when you see those types of commercials, or were you involved in an automobile accident and you're having trouble dealing with the insurance company, all those kinds of attorneys that have those commercials on TV, they tend to work on contingency. And what that means is you don't pay them a dime. And then they will take your case, and when you um, settle or when you go to court, depending on what happens, they will take a percentage of your settlement or of your winnings of the case. But the thing is that it tends to be a much higher percentage, a greater fee than it would be if you just paid an attorney and paid them on, kept them on retainer and paid them um, throughout your case. So that's why they tend to work in a slightly different way. They're kind of working on credit under the assumption that they'll be able to win your case, because if they don't win, then they worked for free. But they are assuming that they'll work your case. But it's often personal injury attorneys. You'll see medical malpractice works that way a lot. Um, but I always think of the commercials on television um, with those types of attorneys. I can't think of any. There are some national ones, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. So next time you see one of those attorney commercials on TV, um, they are likely, and they may even mention that you don't have to pay up front, and that's because they're working on contingency. So if you have any other questions on any of the quiz, anything else from last week, and let's see, this coming week, we're kind of moving on to looking at finance, the health insurance side, so the economics of the finance piece. But we also have a writing assignment for this week, so make sure you take that into consideration when you're doing your work. We have our 2 discussions and then our writing assignment. And what you're going to do, because we are talking about the health insurance financing, and we've talked about a bunch of different aspects of the industry, but we're going to create like a bright idea of some sort for a cost containment competition. So, come up with some interesting idea of how we might want to um, contain cost in the industry. And then, so that's going to be just kind of an initial first part of the assignment. And then following that would be a paper, an analysis, um, using some of the principles that we've learned thus far to move through and discuss how you feel that economically that will contain cost in whatever area is that you want to contain cost. So that's our assignment for this week. And if you have any questions, please let me know. But otherwise, I will look forward to talking to you throughout the week. Okay, thanks.